GM Matthew Sadler, and welcome to this to the first in a series of videos looking at the games played between the great world champion Emanuel Lasker and one of his challengers over a period of 40 years, the great US player Frank Marshall. Why are these games worth looking at? Well, it all started for me because Emanuel Lasker has been getting an awful lot of attention recently. A little while back there was a book written by John Nunn called John Nunn's Chess Course. You wouldn't know it from the title, but it addressed all facets of the game using Emanuel Lasker's games as an example. It's a very, very good book. And then very recently there's the first volume of 3 of a fantastic biography by Forster, Nageli and Tischberiek, which looks at the whole range of Lasker's varied and wonderful life, actually. It's a fantastic book. You really recommend buying that one. And there's also an interesting book that came out recently, and that's in the Everyman Move by Move series. It's a book by Zenon Franco called Lasker Move by Move. In that book, I saw a game between Emanuel Lasker and Frank Marshall, New York 1924, which I hadn't seen before. And although Lasker won, Marshall played with such verve and inventiveness that, well, he really contributed towards making the game an excellent one. And it made me think, well, maybe I should have a look at a few other games between these players and see what they're like. It's a little bit of an error I've made really in the past, because Lasker's score against Marshall was so large. He won 12 and lost 2 in their career with a number of draws as well. I never really took Frank Marshall that seriously as a player, but looking through these games again, I suddenly thought, wow, there's just a huge breadth of interest in these games. Lots of tactics, lots of attacks, lots of brilliant defence. Really something worthwhile. So, well, I've enjoyed analysing them a lot, and I hope you're going to enjoy this this video series. We're going to start with their very first encounter, which was actually a game that Marshall won. And as he describes in his book of selected games, he had to wait another 40 years before he scored his second win. And that was actually in an exhibition game. It's one of the last that Lasker played before his death in 1941. Anyway, hope you enjoy this video. So let's dive into this game. Frank Marshall against Emanuel Lasker, Paris 1900. A very critical tournament for Frank Marshall. Really the tournament where he broke through and showed that he was one of the leading players of that time. And Emanuel Lasker started very well in this tournament, so it was a very big game for Frank Marshall. So Frank Marshall started with d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3. Just before showing you how the game actually continued, which was knight f6, I'll just show you the ideas that Frank Marshall came up against the triangle semi-Slav. Ideas that are still very, very current nowadays, and well, the variation is so complicated, the theoretical status is still very unclear. Marshall went e4, which he loved doing in these types of positions. D takes e4, knight e4, and then bishop b4 check. And well, the first game I think Marshall played knight c3, but the next time he faced it, he played bishop d2, queen d4, bishop b4, queen e4, and now he played the main theoretical move in this position still, bishop e2. And as you can see, in return for the pawn, and also offering an extra pawn on g2, White's got, well, fantastic control of the dark squares. Marshall won a phenomenal game against the very strong player Karl Schlechter, also somebody who fought Emanuel Lasker for the World Championship. The second game against a more modest player went less well, but he won that game too, and so ended up scoring very well with his variation. And as I said, this variation is still very popular nowadays, and still a topic of discussion at the top level. Well, you'll recognise what the approach that Marshall took in this game. After knight f6, he played bishop g5, and after c6, he played e4. It's slightly less good than in the triangle semi-Slav, because after bishop b4 check, white does have to return with knight c3. And in the subsequent exchanges, black gives white double pawns on the c-file, and then also takes the opportunity to remove the bishop on d2 and thus destroy white's bishop pair. So now Marshall played a novelty. He played the very natural move knight f3. In a previous game, queen c2 had been played, knight d2, queen d2, which was somewhat slow, and black had a very good game after castles. Knight f3 just aims to accelerate things a little bit. In actual fact, it elicited a very risky response from Lasker. Probably Lasker didn't know Marshall that well, first time they'd met, and hadn't realised that that Marshall was an extremely dangerous tactician, and so he sort of plunged headlong into complications. I think that Lasker rather a little bit later on would have played something safer like knight d2, queen d2, castles, and then following up with knight c6 and rook d8. And the position's interesting, but black in principle has no real problems. However, Lasker played the sharp move knight takes c3. Now, one of the ideas is that if queen b3, then black can unpin very easily with this manoeuvre. Bishop e3, knight e4, get the knight to safety when black should be fine. Although my engine thinks that white can cause still a little bit more trouble with queen b5 check. However, Marshall played much more ambitiously. He played d takes c5. And after knight d1, bishop a5, knight b2, it looks like the knight is coming back to a4 when the c5 pawn will be weak and attackable by black's knights. But Marshall played a4, which is the most testing move, stopping the knight from coming back to a4 and just threatening bishop c3 or rook a2, picking up the knight. But Lasker, I think, had something prepared. Spoiling the surprise there. He played bishop d7, attacking the pawn on a4, and just ready to extricate the knight. And well, as you've just seen, Marshall had a surprise prepared. The point is that if you go knight e5, which looks very natural, get rid of that bishop on d7, and then the knight on b2 can't escape anymore, then black has the great move knight c6. Attacking the bishop on a5, so knight e5, knight d7, knight a5, knight d7, rook c8. Black follows up with rook c5, followed by taking the pawn on c4, and black's actually just winning. And after knight c6, bishop c6, well, the bishop is renewing its attack on the a4 pawn, so black's just going to win that a pawn. And finally, bishop c3, we just take on e5. Bishop b2, and then f6, and no problem whatsoever. But yeah, Marshall had prepared this gorgeous little idea, c6, and it just really breaks up the coordination of black's position. So knight c6 is simply met by bishop c3, when the knight is now blocking the attack of the bishop on d7 on the pawn on a4, so the knight on b2 is gone. And after bishop c6, then black no longer has this resource, knight c6. So Marshall played, well, the natural continuation now, which is knight e5. Although when I saw it, I thought that this might not be the best, and I preferred another move. And actually, look at it with my engine afterwards, my engine actually agrees. So what's wrong with knight e5? Well, both Teichmann in the British Chess Magazine and Marshall himself in his Best Games collection points out that black has the resource knight d7. And after knight c6, b takes c6, bishop c3, the b file has been opened, so black can play rook b8, defending the knight on b2. And the crux of it is this rather unfair tactic, rook a2, knight takes c4, and after bishop c4, rook b1 wins for black. Rather unfair, I feel, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, Marshall gives a continuation, bishop g7, rook g8, bishop d4. But after king e7, that knight on b2 is quite hard for white to attack, and well, I mean, black's got so much activity, the pawns on c4 and a4 a week, it's pretty likely that that knight on b2 is getting out alive. Still quite, yeah, Marshall calls the knight safe but awkward, which is a pretty good description, basically. But I think it's probably going to end up in a draw. So knight d7 would have been the best move, which was why I was interested in this move, knight d4. Similar ideas. I mean, I just want to take on c6 and go bishop c3 or rook a2. But obviously I'm not getting hit by tempo with knight d7. Knight d7 I could just meet with rook a2. The best move for black is to play bishop e4, to play knight d3 check. And then my key idea was this move knight b5, which has got a very unpleasant dual threat. Knight c7 check is obvious, but there's also knight d6, forking the king on e8 and the bishop on e4. So the best that black has got, I think, is to go knight c6, bishop c3, knight d3, takes, knight c7, king e7, knight a8, rook a8, or something, you know, similar to this. And now a move like c5. And I mean, black's not doing too badly. His position, you know, has some solid points. For example, the light square bishop will probably find a good spot on d5, and his pawn structure is quite even. But you know, there's this weak pawn on b7, and white's rooks have got plenty of space to move around and create fresh weaknesses in the black position. I think that black will struggle against a good technician here. I really do. I wouldn't fancy defending this against Magnus, put it that way. So that was actually the best that white had, and it would have been quite strong. I mean, there are some quite interesting variations. I looked at b6, bishop d2, bishop e4, and now knight b5 again is the best move. You know, threatening this again, this double c7 d6 attack. But one move I also looked at, which I thought might be even clearer, was to go rook a3, and after knight c6, bishop c3, which looks quite good, attacking knight on b2, defending the knight on d4, and I'm always threatening knight takes c6 just to get the knight out of the way if it's attacked. However, black has got this beautiful resource: rook d8, rook d1 check, king e2, bishop d3 check, king there, knight c4. And the beautiful point of it is that you played rook d8 earlier, not castle's queenside, because after takes, king e2, rook d6, knight takes a7 is not check, so you can just take the rook on a3. So I was pretty pleased with myself for having seen all that, and the engine says that it's all correct. Unfortunately, I hadn't really grasped the full extent of the sideline. I was pleased I spotted rook a1, but I simply thought that this would be the way to deal with it. Simply because after rook f1, then I've got knight d2 check, no problem. However, my engine pointed out to me that white can simply play bishop c3, covering d2, and after bishop d3, rook d1, there's a rather big problem, because after bishop g6, rook d8 check is mate. So that was rather sad, but my engine was merciful and also told me the best way to play, which was knight d2 check, so swapping the move order around. And then you end up in this rather crazy ending. Rook h1, knight a7, and then I think my engine wanted to play f6 just to make sure the king was safe. But I imagine that the correct result is a draw here. I'm sure black will be able to give up his rook for the a pawn and a minor piece, and then well, with everything on one side, two minor pieces against a rook, you know, it should be fine. I mean, black might even be able to nab the h pawn, and you know, and then go for sacrificing the rook for a and minor piece. That might work too. So it's probably just going to be a draw basically. But great fun lines. But as I said, the best move for white then is not rook a3. It's this move knight b5. When the line I was looking at was king d7, bishop c3. Knight d3 check is no longer possible because the castle queenside picking up the bishop. So black should play a6. And then I was playing takes, rook g8, bishop b2, ab. And I think I was playing f3 now, followed by a takes b5, and white has a healthy extra pawn. So knight d4 is looking pretty good for white in this position. But well, Marshall played knight e5, and Lasker played bishop e4 here. And here Marshall made a mistake, although not an obvious one. He played the move bishop c3, f6, and then f3. And here actually I worked out the correct way to play for black. Only, well, when I put it onto my engine, I was absolutely expecting that the engine would show where I was going wrong, where my blind spot was. But actually it turned out to be that it's actually possible for black to save that knight on b2. You just wouldn't believe it. The key idea is to play bishop f5 first of all. So, you know, this knight on e5 can't retreat because, well, black will get knight d3 in. So g4 is natural. But now after black plays bishop c2, you'll suddenly notice that the knight on e5 does not have any retreat squares. So it can't go back to f3, g4. g4 has been taken away by the g-pawn, and d3, c6, d7, all those squares are covered. It doesn't look like the end of the story. I mean, you play king d2, and then you play this move knight d1. The idea being that after king c2, you don't play knight c3 when knight d3 retreats the knight and leaves the knight on c3 looking rather silly. You play this move knight e3 check. And yeah, white doesn't have a good place for the king. It's quite amazing, but if I go to d2, then knight f1 is check. If I go to d3, then after knight f1, indeed the knight is trapped on f1, but so's the knight on e5. So we're going to get rook f1, f takes e5. I mean, still a bit better for white, but you know, acceptable for black. And if I go king b3, I've got to be a little bit careful here. I take on e5. And the idea is basically that if the bishop comes to a square like d3, then I can do something like knight c6, I imagine, and then my knight's actually going to be able to escape to g2 and f4. Absolutely amazing. It really does work. I was quite astounded by that. So what was the best line for white? Actually, the best line for white was to play the move rook a2 in this position. And after f6, we play f3. And the key idea is that the bishop on f5 doesn't have a good spot to go to. Because if I go bishop c2 now, then there's simply rook b2, and I attack the bishop on c2, and then the knight on e5 will be able to retreat. So, yeah, amazing stuff, actually. Really incredible that, that this move, bishop c3, shouldn't actually win. Lasker just went bishop c2, which kind of surprises me, actually, because I would have thought that Lasker would be... this was the sort of thing that Lasker, you know, really found. He was such a good defender. King d2, and yeah, now we see the problem. This knight on e5 can retreat to g4, you know, against you know, any of the tactical options like knight d1. So Lasker went knight a4, king c2, knight c3, knight d3. He'd won an extra pawn on a4, but the knight was still trapped. Knight d5 takes. And yeah, it's 3 pawns for the piece, but well, the pawn on d5 this week, actually Marshall could have won it immediately, I think, with knight b4. But although this is quite a good move, weakening up those queenside pawns, and there are just, you know, quite a few holes really in the whole in black structure. And Marshall, I think, got a little bit nervous, made a few little errors, but the win was never in doubt, and he won. He won in about 65 moves in the end. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that game. Lots of interesting tactical stuff there, and yeah, I mean, just quite amazing to to from a reasonably quiet Queen's Gambit decline just to get all these sort of tactics at such an early stage. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and watch out for more videos on the games between Emanuel Lasker and Frank.